When I was a senior in high school, my teenage angst reached a fever point. I was convinced that I was more knowledgeable about the real world and what I considered fairness than my dad and stepmother. As such, I moved out of my house about 6 months before graduation. I knew a group of guys that lived in a house about 30 minutes away. This house belonged to one of the guys' parents until they had let the bank foreclose. I'm not sure of the details exactly, but the bank hadn't completed the foreclose, and we all lived there with only the utilities as expenses. It was a large house, 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. There were only 3 guys living there at the time, so they had an open room. I somehow got them to agree to my living there for only $100 a month, which was a steal, especially considering I only had a part-time job. At the time, one of the guys was never there at all, living with a girlfriend, I think. One guy, we'll call him Jimmy, was going to college and working full time. He would crash in town sometimes, so he was only there about 2 nights a week. The other roommate, who we'll call Brad, was also only there 2 or 3 nights a week. I don't remember why. Obviously, I spent a majority of the week at the house alone. One of these nights I was alone, I turned the light out and got on my mattress on the floor. I had nothing to my name but a mattress and a shotgun at this stage of life. I was just starting to drift off to sleep and could hear someone walking around downstairs. I thought Jimmy was home, as he was the only one who would get home at this hour. One other thing you should understand about the house was that all of the bedrooms were upstairs, mine being right at the end of the stairs. The stairs went halfway, turned 90 degrees, and continued up to the second floor to the hallway. So anyone who went up the stairs went by my bedroom door. Anyway, I hear who I think is Jimmy walking around downstairs. Then all at once, I hear them come up the stairs at a full run, violently stomping on each stair as they go. It was very fast, like sprinting up the stairs while trying to make as much noise as possible. I thought Jimmy was trying to be funny and scare me. So to be funny back, I took my shotgun, a pump action, and was going to jump into the hall and rack it really loud while I did. I didn't have any ammo for it, so it was totally safe. Well, imagine my surprise when I flung the door open and nobody was there. No lights on, nobody home. I went room by room and carefully checked the entire house. All the doors were locked, no cars outside. I was totally alone, with no explanation for what I had heard. Fast forward a month or so, Brad and Jimmy are at home with me. We're talking about the house and how it looked like the bank was finally going to take possession and we would all have to move. I mentioned that I wasn't terribly disappointed by this because the house kinda gave me the creeps. Brad and Jimmy exchanged a look at that comment. Brad then asks why I say that. I tell them the story about the stair stomping. Again, they exchanged a look without saying anything. When I asked what was going on, Brad said that he had a similar experience just a week or so before. Brad's room was the master bedroom. His floor had a spot we called the squeak. You can probably guess that we called it this because if you stepped there, the floor would loudly squeak. Not uncommon for a 2-story home. We all just avoided that spot when walking around. Anyway, Brad went on to say that he was at home alone, drifting off to sleep, when he heard someone walk up the stairs to the second floor. He assumed I was getting home, then his door slowly swung open and then back shut. Brad said he sat there in the dark thinking I was sneaking in his room to scare him. Then he hears the squeak make its usual noise. And finally, he feels his bed do that lean that beds do when someone sits on the side. Thinking he would get me first, he reached out to slap what he thought was sitting on the side of his bed. Only when he slapped, there was nothing there. Brad got up, turned the light on, searched his room, and eventually the whole house. Nobody was there. In fact, I was 40 minutes away at the time, staying with a friend. At hearing each other's stories, we all didn't really know what to make of it. In fact, we didn't really discuss it further because we didn't want to acknowledge what we couldn't explain. Finally, the time came for us all to move out. The power had been turned off, there was no water, and we had all found new places to live. I had been staying at my new apartment for over a month when Brad calls to tell me that if I had anything left at the house, that I needed to get it within the next couple of days. So I asked a friend, we'll call her Mary, to ride over there with me to grab a couple of things. We get there, and I tell Mary that I'll be right back and to just wait in the car. I go in, go right up the stairs, go to my room, grab my things, and leave. I didn't want to be there more than I had to. When I get in the car, Mary asks me, I thought you only had stuff in your room. I did, I told her. Then why were you in that room? She asked, pointing to the office on the opposite end of the house. I wasn't, I said. I went straight to my room and right back out. Mary has this really confused look on her face now. I had never told her the stories about what we experienced there, so I know she wouldn't try to tease me. Well, right after you went in, those curtains moved to the side, stayed pulled back a minute, and then went back to normal just before you came out. It must have been the air from the AC or a ceiling fan moving them. All I told her was, yeah, must have been the wind. But inside, I knew there was no power to the house, no AC, no ceiling fans, and no person in that end of the house. No logical reason for the curtains to move. I quickly put the car in drive and left. My roommates and I had some great times in that house. We played a lot of pranks and had some great laughs and made some lifelong memories together. However, I'm glad I didn't live there longer than I did because obviously we had a roommate of some kind that we were completely unaware of. This happened to me a few years ago while I was still in university. The people involved are still out there somewhere, so obviously I'm not going to use any identifiable information. The only thing that really matters as a background is that this took place in a car wash, as in customers wash their own cars and pay when they exit the building. The job of the staff was to serve customers as they pay, handle any problems in the building, and general cleaning and maintenance. The job wasn't particularly stimulating, but it was enough to serve as a part-time job to get through school. Most workers stayed for a few months or a year before moving on to something else. It definitely wasn't a career though. Most of my coworkers were decent enough people, and we had our good times working together. That all changed when a new employee was introduced to the rest of us. Let's call him Frank. Frank was introduced as a new employee that would be taking weekend shifts and some nights. The first thing that struck me was how much older he was than the rest of us. He had to have been in his late 30s. The rest of us were at least 10 years younger than him, but it wasn't a big deal or anything. People had to get what they could, right? He didn't talk much during our first staff meeting and seemed pretty disinterested in the whole thing. He didn't talk to us, respond to our greetings, offer any information about himself, or make any effort to engage in conversation. Again, no big deal. Maybe he wasn't a people person. It's not like this type of job attracts the best and brightest, but everyone deserves some type of employment. I had the responsibility of his new guy training. The job was simple enough: managing a cash register, cleaning, accounting, and other simple tasks. I walked him through the cash register, how to match the till with the daily receipts, that sort of thing. He never responded to anything with more than a nod or maybe a grunt, with no real conversation. But when it came to cleaning, he made it perfectly clear that he wasn't going to clean, didn't do vacuums or water hoses, and had no intention of doing anything other than the most basic jobs of managing the cash register. I was a bit surprised by his flat-out refusal to actually do the job he was hired to do, and pointed out that the boss, let's call him Charles, expected us all to complete our own shifts properly. He looked me right in the eye and stated with no emotion, "Fuck Charles." He then proceeded to stand by the no smoking sign and light up a cigarette. This was the basic routine from then on out. After his shifts, the building was a mess. Nothing was done properly. Hoses and vacuums were left on the floor, and worst of all, cash appeared to be missing from the register on almost a weekly basis. Sometimes he'd leave a note like, I took $20 for gas money and signed it Frank, and sometimes there would be no note at all. We had to phone Charles every time the register was short because we didn't want to get blamed for it. But Charles was strangely dismissive of our concerns. It always ended up with, okay, I'll talk to him about it. But nothing ever changed. I mean, none of the other staff would get away with behavior like this. Why Frank? He didn't do his job, was stealing money, customers complained, and he was generally really unpleasant to be around. This all came crashing down one night when I was on shift. It was a slow night, around 9 p.m., and only a few customers were in the building. Nights were always pretty slow, and I was using the time to get some homework done for school. I heard a knocking at the office door from the outside, and looking back, saw Frank standing there with the bag in his hand. I was instantly extremely uneasy. It was my shift. He wasn't supposed to be there. And plus, I really didn't want to talk to him at all. He kept knocking on the glass door until I opened it, and instantly, a smell of booze wafted off of him. His car was in the parking lot, meaning he'd driven there while obviously extremely intoxicated. He swayed on his feet as he pushed past me and stumbled into the office. He set the bag down on the counter and pulled out a 2-liter bottle of Coke and a half-empty bottle of rum. He set 2 plastic cups on the counter and turned to face me. His speech was horribly slurred, and he smelled terrible. I never said this before, but you're an okay guy, he slurred. Most of the guys working here are losers. But you're going places, and I could see that, and I think that's great. You know how people talk when they're drunk, that incoherent rambling and odd laughter at odd moments. You gotta have a drink with me. Come on, let's have a rum and a Coke. He started to pour the liquor into the plastic cup. I instantly told him, dude, no way. I'm on shift and people are here. You really should go. Someone's gonna see this. He acted like he didn't even hear me. Rum and Coke. That's the way to go. You want to enjoy this crap job as much as you can. You can't do it sober, and all sorts of nonsense. Again, I said, look, I appreciate it, but I really can't. Charles is supposed to come by any time now to collect the cash from the safe, and if he sees me here drinking, I'll get fired, and I need this job to pay for school. Like flipping a light switch, that seemed to really set him off. He slammed the plastic cups down on the counter, spilling rum everywhere. At the top of his lungs, he shouted "fuck Charles" and went on a terrifying rampage in the office. He picked up the maintenance logbook and threw it at the glass door, causing a huge banging sound to reverberate in the building. Customers stopped to look at us, but he didn't care. He threw things against the wall, kicked over the chair, abused pretty much anything in his vicinity, shouting, cursing, breaking anything he could. And just like that, it passed. As drunk people do, the wave of anger passed over him as suddenly as it started, and he calmed down, picking up the chair to sit on it, again facing me intently, that unfocused look in his eye. Customers were still looking at us, obviously wanting to leave the building, but not sure if they should approach the office or not. I didn't know what to do, and just stood there, hardly able to comprehend what just happened, and equally as scared that it could happen again. Finally, he spoke up. Hey, it's almost closing time. Forget the cleaning. Get these idiot customers out of here, and I'll give you a ride home. You deserve a ride at least. Come on, let's get out of here. This guy was too drunk to stand properly. There was no way I was getting in his car. Hey, thanks man, I appreciate it. I said nervously but trying to act cool. I actually have somewhere to be after I close, so someone is coming to pick me up. But hey, I appreciate it, and next time for sure. I was totally lying, but had no other excuse to not get into his car. He thought that over and finally said something like, okay, suit yourself. He picked up his rum and Coke, left the cups and spilled booze on the counter and left, his car tires squealing as he tore out of the parking lot. I prayed he didn't hit anyone, and prayed just as hard that a cop would see him, but neither of those things happened. It took me an hour to clean up the office he had destroyed, and I didn't bother telling Charles. Why even bother? 2 weeks or so passed, and I didn't hear much from Frank. He was either done trying to be my friend or just lost interest, and either was fine by me. It was my shift again, when a younger looking guy slowly approached the office, looking around as if he was nervous. This immediately got my attention, and I was having images of being robbed. He slowly knocked on the office door, and I opened it, just a crack. "Hey guy, you're still on shift tonight, yeah? Nobody else around?" He asked with a weird quiver in his voice. "Yeah, just me and the security cameras," I said as a half joke, motioning towards the security camera mounted in the office. I now fully expected this guy was here to rob me. The security cameras didn't interest him in the slightest. "Oh, okay, cool. I really gotta get my company truck clean, but I wasn't sure who was working tonight," he said, his voice completely different and more relaxed. I gave him an inquisitive look, like what difference does it make who's on shift tonight kind of look. He must have caught my meaning because he said, "Yeah, well, I heard Frank was working here now, and there's no way I'm coming in here if that murdering psychopath is around. I haven't talked to that psycho in years, and there's no way I'm starting now." He must have seen me pick my jaw up off the floor after hearing him, because he continued with, "You know about him, right? You know you should stay as far away from him as possible, right?" I replied with, "No, I have no idea what he got himself into. I don't see him much, but we're not friends or anything." This guy then proceeded to fill me in on the last few years of Frank's life. Frank just got out of prison for causing an accident driving while drunk. He swerved into the wrong lane, causing an oncoming car to smash into a truck at high speed, killing two parents and their young daughter. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Apparently, Frank had blamed the accident on alcohol that he was using to get over the immense stresses in his life, and the judge took pity on him, giving him an extremely lenient sentence, provided he kept his promise to stop drinking and attend alcoholic meetings. He served a few years in jail, got out, and ended up here, the same guy who ruined the office while drunk and then tried to get me into his car was supposedly a recovering alcoholic who had already ended 3 lives because of his problem with alcohol. He hadn't stopped drinking. He felt no remorse for what he did. He played the system, acted like the victim in court, and here he was, putting my life in danger by showing up drunk and trying to get me into his car. I had no idea at the time how close I was to being in an actual life-threatening situation. It seems I wasn't the only one to hear the story though, because a few days later, Charles called us into the office for a staff meeting, minus Frank. I think the rest of the staff knew by now, and some of them even knew more than I did. For example, they knew that Charles hired Frank on an early release program designed to give offenders a second chance. They knew Charles was getting incentives from the government as part of this program. They knew that because of this, that Charles overlooked his poor performance, was lying to the prison system to keep Charles on staff because the incentives were so good. To say things got heated during the meeting would be an understatement. We argued that Charles had the responsibility to let us know that Frank was released from a manslaughter sentence and that neglecting to do so would put us all in danger. Charles argued that we couldn't possibly understand the guilt he must be feeling after the accident, and everyone deserves a second chance. Luckily for me, other staff were aware that he showed up for work drunk, and they knew this because customers had routinely complained about the office stinking like booze, and Frank obviously being intoxicated. There's no way Charles was unaware of this. No way he didn't know Frank was still a drunk, and driving to and from work no less. Charles knew about everything and still put our lives in danger because the incentives to keep him hired were more important than our lives. I guess there's no level too low for people to stoop to, as long as the reward is good enough. I never saw Frank again, and I hope I never do. I don't know if he went back to prison or just found some other greedy manager to vouch for him. I left that job not too long after and don't remember it fondly. Strangely enough, looking back, there's one thing Frank and I can agree on. Fuck Charles. A few weeks ago, I was working as a utility staff member in our Supermax unit of our prison. These 2 units are brand new and are separated from the rest of the prison. Now, as a utility, the job I serve is basically ensuring everything gets done, and I'm a first responder in the event that an emergency event unfolds. There was another staff member I worked with. His name is D, and he was promoted to sergeant of this unit. Myself and D were having our sixth sense, so to speak, that tensions were high on Unit 1. We were feeling this all week. With these thoughts in mind, upper admin, including the warden, scheduled all of Unit 1A to be searched cell to cell in an effort to discard some contraband. For those uninitiated, most contraband are items inmates aren't allowed to have. These items range in severity, but we unanimously say the big ticket items are weapons, drugs, hooch, homemade alcohol, and cell phones. I know what you're thinking, and yes, they can get those items or make them in the prison. The time is 10:30 a.m., and this is usually designated for our first count time of the shift. So while we are conducting these mass searches, the rest of the institution is counting their inmates. I myself was helping the search team with anything they needed to help with the searches. We assumed that something could happen at any moment. However, while we were correct in our assumption, we unfortunately were wrong about the unit. The events are as follow. At approximately 10:40 a.m., I heard a call over the radio from Unit 2. We have 3 intoxicated inmates in a cell over here. This actually elicited a head tilt and an eyebrow raise from me, as there were only 2 inmates per cell. I looked down at D from one of the top tier railings. Then the sergeant of Unit 2 gets on the radio and says, "I'll be down there in a minute." The protocol for incorrect inmates in cells is to remove said inmate from the cell and place them in holding, a protocol that I assumed the 2A sergeant was doing, and I was correct. The next radio traffic was something I wasn't expecting, and in all honesty, happened very quickly. When the Unit 2 sergeant made it to 2A, he called for the door to be opened on the radio, followed by Sergeant D. "I need additional staff here." This was said in a calm voice, so it didn't ring any alarms in my head. I started moving off 1A and leaving Unit 1 building towards Unit 2 building. Not even as I get fully out of Unit 1 building, I didn't hear the most haunting radio traffic I think I've ever heard in all of my almost 5 years of service. "We need all available staff. Staff assault that have weapons." I've never ran so fast in my entire life. When I went through the front door to Unit 2 and made it to the 2A door, I banged so hard and yelled at the control station officer to run the damn door now. And when the door opened, it was absolute chaos. Now, whether or not it was a trick of the eye, the sun coming in from the windows, or maybe the pepper spray all over the ground, I'm not joking when I say the unit had a red tint to it. It looked like I stepped into a literal depiction of hell. First thing I see is one staff member getting his face stomped in by an inmate. I assessed the situation and saw that staff were already en route to help him, so I scanned more left. On the stairs leading up to the top tier, an inmate and staff member were fighting and rolling down the stairs. However, beneath those stairs was a staff member, lying on the ground with an inmate on top of him, stabbing the staff member. I didn't even realize how fast I was running and started yelling, "Get off now, get off." The inmates didn't hear me, and by this point, I'm full on sprinting at this. I would literally sit here and tell you, my inner monologue decided we were choosing violence today and said we're gonna spear the fuck out of this guy. And I did. Hard. I mean, this guy literally turned, saw me coming, and got eyes bigger than I've ever seen before. Within a split second, I hit his ribs with my right shoulder and hit the ground. The next thing I remember is my eyes burning. Apparently, some pepper spray splashed in my eyes upon the impact of both our bodies. So here I am, blind, on top of a dangerous criminal who's wielding a homemade knife. I managed to force my eyes open long enough to see this guy punch in my head. As to not get in trouble here, I'm going to say multiple staff did a dog pile on us, and we beat this dude down so he would drop the knife. After that, I got off the unit eyes burning, shoulder hurting, and apparently blood around my neck, with no pain or wound. Strange. However, it was when I went to the hospital and returned to work that I got to see the CCTV camera footage of the assaults. Apparently, as I hit the inmate square in the ribs, he raises his knife and goes to stab me in the side of the neck. It was only the impact hitting the ground that his hand moved and he stabbed me in the back instead. 7 of us went to the hospital that day with stab wounds, and today I just had my first PTSD nightmare about the incident. I woke up in a pool of sweat and was having a panic attack. I vomited on the floor and finally calmed down. I tried to play off that I'm a very strong guy, and I am to a point, but even the strong have moments of weakness. As I lay here in bed and share this story to all who listen to this, please hug your loved ones tight when you see them. You never know when death will hit. And I'll end this story with one of my favorite quotes. You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper.